Hello everyone. Today we're going to be looking at this. This is a Motorola International 7500. These operate on GSM 900 and I think as far as I know these were released back end of 1995, early 1996. So let's have a look. This is what you got when you bought one of these back in the day. So right off the bat we can see there's a whole bunch of pamphlets. You got a nice little colourful manual. Of course, back in the day, people used to read the manual. Nowadays, you probably only get a PDF off a website. You got a whole bunch of paperwork with call charges and other stuff. Digital guide. Of course, back then they had analog here as well. So they included this digital guide. A sheet to tell you how much of your hard-earned money they were going to take from you, and some other stuff which doesn't really interest me. They gave you a couple of maps of other countries where you could use GSM back in the day. Of course, these maps are very out of date. When is this dated? This is dated September 1995. So quite out of date. So let's have a look and see what you got. This is what you got. So you got the extended battery is an optional extra, obviously, and so is the car charger. But I've included these anyway. You got a thin battery. You got a desktop charging cradle, and you got the phone, obviously. I'm not sure the leather case was included, and obviously you got the wall charger for this cradle, which I don't have in the box because it didn't fit. So this is what it looks like. I'm going to move this out of the way. With a thick battery, obviously that would be substantial in size. This is of course not to be confused with the Motorola 7200, which looks exactly identical. In fact, this is one. So on my left is the 7200. Ignore the fact this one has a car kit compatible piece. The 7200 would have exactly the same antenna as this 7500. They're actually identical in sort of at first glance, but the similarities kind of end there because the 7500 is a much more advanced phone in terms of features, and the 7200 and the 5200 are very similar. I did a video about the 5200 I did another video. So for example, this is a 5200 and that's pretty much identical. The buttons are the same, the functions are the same. There really isn't much in it in terms of difference. So the main difference, that's a 5200, this is a 7200, and this is a 7500. Now right off the bat we can see that the 7500 has some slightly different buttons. It's got the Phonebook button, which is this button right here, whereas the others don't. I mean, both the 7200 and the 5200 did have Phonebook functions, but they were very basic. You just type the number in, press memory plus, and then punch the name in, and it would store that. But to recall it, you would just do memory recall, which is MR, and then you'd have to give in the memory location to get the name and number back. With a 7500, it was actually a lot simpler. The menu in this is so much better to use. It's such a more easy way to navigate through the menu, and I'll fire this up and I'll show you actually the differences, because it is somewhat different in terms of a menu structure. So let me try and get a good battery for this, and we'll fire this one up. And we'll stick a good battery on this as well. Of course, these old batteries, they're all nickel metal hydride or NiCads, and they don't really keep their charge for very long. So I've got a more up-to-date battery for each of these phones. So first off, I'm going to switch on. There really isn't much. To the untrained eye, these phones would be identical. This one's got a SIM card in it. I just realized. Wonder if that picks up service. Okay, maybe not. This was the original SIM card I bought it with, actually. Telstra, that's a cellular provider in Australia, and this is how originally the SIM cards were issued. None of this this pop-out stuff, like for example some of these. This is a newer card, obviously, and you can just pop out the SIM, and you can also pop out the micro SIM. So let's stick this guy in, and that should pick up cellular service. And we'll get a second SIM card for this guy, and that should pick up service as well. Okay, so with a bit of luck, this should work. Okay, there we go. So as I was saying, the buttons are slightly different in terms of looks, but to the untrained eye, I mean, you couldn't tell these apart. The only difference obviously would be that little number. This is a 75 and that's a 7200. So let me just show you the very minor differences in terms of functions. So if you wanted to recall a number on the 7200, which is this one, you do memory recall, and then you would, there's nothing in there. In fact, I don't even know how to recall the numbers on here. Whereas on the 7500, you just go into your phone book, click OK, or push OK, and it just asks you if you wanted to find the entry by name. So if you were looking for someone whose name starts with an A, you would go OK and then A, and then hit OK, and then this is a number obviously from someone that owned this phone before me, and this would display obviously the number in the phone book. Much easier to use than the 7200, which I actually don't know how to recall. I thought it was just MR and then the memory location. Clearly it's not. And this is why the 7500 is that much nicer of a phone to use. Other features obviously included the dedicated message button. You could go straight to your messages, call voicemail, receive messages, cell broadcast, and then message settings. Cell broadcast is an interesting one because it basically, if you activated this, it would tell you the local dialing code for where the phone was or where you were. So if you were in an area where the dialing code was 011, for example, it would display 011 on your screen. So any calls that were local to 011 or an area with the area code 011, you'd obviously get billed less. That was part of the tariffs back then. Of course, nowadays you just place a call and you get billed, or it comes out of your allowance. They don't really segregate calls like that anymore. So this one should work. Let me see if I can place a test call. So that's quite happy making the test call. So that's pretty much good to go. I don't know if there's any messages, received messages in here. No messages. So I guess that's pretty much all I have to say about this. I haven't quite worked out what this button is. I would think this would mute the phone, but it doesn't seem to do much. Whereas on the 7200, you could easily adjust the ringer by just hitting that button, and then either pressing up or down on the side to adjust the ringer. I don't actually know how to do this on the 7500. I haven't worked it out, but I do have the manual for it, so I might have to read up on that later and just check it out. It's got an extra info button to give you some tips on how to use the menu. Pretty basic, but it does work. So if you're in the menu and you hit information, it tells you a little bit about the function. And you didn't have that on the 7200 or even the 5200, or actually on any of the older Microtacs, like this here, which is an M300, and that was released back in 1994, or an M760, which looks like the M750 actually, which is the European model. That actually looks very similar to the Motorola Select's 3000, I think. Or is it the 2000? No, I think that's the 3000. But anyway, going back to the 7500, this is a pretty neat phone. This is definitely one I could use. It's just that the standby time, even with an extended modern battery, isn't great. So I actually prefer using the other phones, like the Select 6000 model, or one of these. These you can still use these today because these also take a SIM, which slots in here, a bit like this. And the battery, the same battery on this phone lasts a lot longer than it does on this, presumably because these were programmed to output a lot more power, I guess, or I don't know why. But anyway, so that's pretty much all I have to say about this phone. Do check out some of my other videos. If you have any problems, or if you want to know how to unlock these, I have a sim which probably does that. So fire away with your questions, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.